I have only told this story to 3 people outside the old military buddies who have similar stories to this experience. First, I need to set the scene. Tucked in a mountain valley in Balgan, Afghanistan, is a place called Russian Hill. Tapa Gorgan, as it's also known. We just call it Tapa. It's the only hill in this entire valley, and that is not by mistake. It is a burial mound that has existed since the times of Alexander the Great. Generations of locals have been buried here, and this also includes the dead Russians from the failed invasion back in the 80s. Now, what did the American Special Operations do when they came to this valley? That's right, level off the top and stick a combat outpost on it. So this is where my story begins. I was a regular army paratrooper attached to the special operations team that built the outpost. One of the roles of the regular army guys was to watch the radios at night. We would always get weird babble on them at night, but that could be written off as interface, though years as a radio operator for my team led me to think otherwise. I had that duty one night. Between 2:45 and 3 a.m. my shift ends, and I walk down the hill to our little bathroom area. I'm doing my business in this little cinder block hut with a hole in it when I hear walking up the hill next to me. I at first think nothing of it, probably just one of the local guards coming up for a shift change, but being in the middle of the night and me in a combat zone, I do listen and pay attention. I can hear the sound of gear rattling, which I know for a fact that our locals don't wear gear with meta-inch buckles or boots for that matter. I've been on patrol with them multiple times and they hang around the outpost, and I know what they sound like when they move. This wasn't that. This was the heavy-set boot steps of a soldier in combat gear. Now, not wanting to die on the throne, and the fact that I was one of very few Americans at this outpost, I decided I probably needed to know who was going up the hill. So I crack the door and peek outside, and holy hell bananas, there is someone on the hill. It happened to be a mostly full moon, and I had decent ambient light. They were carrying an AK, so not an American. They also had on a uniform that's not the typical Afghan garb, not one of our ALPs. At this point, they are close to the top of the hill, and this person is not someone from the outpost. I grab my rifle and pop out the door and run up the hill after them. I get to the top. Not a single person was around. I walk over to the building where the radio guard is and knock on the door. My buddy answers and asks what's up. I checked them to see if anyone else was up or came in there, and he said that no one had come out of the barracks. I bummed a cigarette and laughed about what happened. The next day, while eating lunch, we joked about it, and one of the special ops guys who had been there longer told us it was the resident Russian ghost. Claimed he started appearing after they used dirt from the hills to fill our HESCO basket for the wall. Turns out they found some bones while doing it. He even told us he had been face to face with it and even drew his sidearm. All the other guys kind of chimed in about their own creepy stories about the place. I got moved to another outpost a few weeks later. Always got super creepy feelings whenever we would visit there. I used to drive for Papa John's, and I have several stories I wish to share. One day I ended up with this delivery on the evening shift, and it was after the dinner rush as far as I can recall. So things were quieter, and not as many people were out and about or on the roads. The customer lived kind of deep in this rundown neighborhood, full of single-story houses, and when I arrived, literally every single light in the house was off. I walked up to the door, figuring that I might as well ring the doorbell since they ordered it. After all, they were waiting for me, right? So I ring. Nothing. I waited a bit, ring again, but there was nothing. At this point I figure, they aren't there or perhaps they're asleep. So I walk away from the door and was about to call my boss to relay that I might have to bring the pizza back, when almost silently, the front door opens up. It's so dark inside, it's like a scene from a horror movie, where you can't see anything at all. Two pale, stringy-looking people come out the darkness without saying much at all, paying cash for the pizza, and then take it, and quietly retreat back into the darkness without ever turning on the lights. I left pretty quickly as it freaked me out. Was I in danger? I doubt it, but those guys were pretty creepy. On another occasion, I had to deliver to this really terribly run-down extended stay motel that I always hated going to because it was literally the most dangerous place we delivered to. It was very late, around 10 p.m. or midnight. I get out of my car, got the pizza from the trunk, and as I begin walking across the parking lot to the guy's room, I see that down at the far end of the parking lot are a very large crowd of people. From what I could tell, they looked like a gang or just a lot of rough people hanging around. I became nervous. After I gave the guy his pizza, I took my empty pizza bags and was walking back when I looked left, and they were all walking towards my direction. Keep in mind, this is a crowd of 30 plus people, and not a single one of them were walking anywhere else. I very quickly cranked the car and got out of there before I had a chance to figure out what was going on, or if it was me they were coming for specifically. Finally, I delivered to this old guy in the same rundown neighborhood as the first story. I had been to his house before, and his deranged-looking son was the one who usually answered the door, but this time I got Pops, and I'll never forget it. He opened the door shirtless, and I was immediately greeted with what looked like a surgical scar. Not too bad, right? It was infested with what looked like warts or skin growth. I don't mean a few either. It was absolutely covered in them, to such a point where I can't think about it without getting sick. They were pale looking, but the colour of rotted snot. It reminded me of the way sea life latches onto other creatures and grows. It was pretty scarring. He paid in cash, and I left as quickly as I could. I remember immediately hitting the hand sanitizer in my car and practically bathing in it. Other than those, I've had a few weirdos, but nothing seriously creepy. There was a guy we delivered to whose nickname was Captain Underpants because he always answered the door in his undies. Gross, but nothing that would mess you up. We also had this massive, sprawling apartment complex that we often had to deliver to, and all the drivers hated it. It had multiple apartment buildings with the same numbers, so it was awful to navigate through, but otherwise new and rather nice. One day I got this delivery to a guy way in the back of the complex called Mr. White. I make my way back there, and as I climb up the stairs I hear this muffled sound coming from his room. I knock, and Mr. White opens the door looking like Mr. Rogers. He had a sweater and everything, but as he's paying for the pizza I keep hearing muffled gags, sounding like female screams coming from his apartment, and it did not sound like the TV. It sounded like a person. But the guy just kept on smiling as he paid, acting like nothing was wrong, and not even trying to explain it away as the TV or anything. He was chill as ice. He finished paying, took the pizza, and I walked back down, kind of wigging out over what I just heard. I couldn't be sure it was someone, but I hated to do nothing, and someone die because of it. I called my boss on the way back, and he advised me to call the police immediately. So I did. They took my name, but I never heard anything about what happened or if the guy was actually doing anything to someone in there. But regardless, it freaked me out. Either I called the cops on an innocent customer, or I saved someone from a psychopath. I still think about that night, from time to time. In high school, one of my best friends was a girl called Susan. She lived with her mum and stepdad out in the middle of nowhere. Even though we were the same age, her parents treated her a lot differently than my parents treated me. For one thing, I was expected to go to driver's training and get a license and a job. I saved enough money working at a fast food job that my parents let me buy a used car. Nothing fancy. I was expected to pay all expenses for it. Susan's parents felt I was a bad influence on her because of my job and my car. Susan wasn't allowed to take driver's training or get a job. After we graduated high school, I joined the military and lost touch with Susan. In the early 90s, living on my own, my parents called me one day at work and passed along a message that Susan had called and wanted to see me. I was really excited to see her. I loved her like a sister. She said she was staying with her mum and stepdad and asked if I remembered where they lived. Of course, I told her. We made arrangements for me to pick her up one night, as she still didn't have a driver's license, and we'd go to dinner and catch up. The night of our get-together, I drove to her childhood home. I went to the back door of a screened-in porch, and I couldn't help but be a little disturbed and puzzled at what I saw. Stuck to the ceiling were the covers of dozens of paperback books. The books hung down from their covers on the ceiling all over the room. On one wall facing the door of the porch was a large picture of a half-man, half-goat. It held something in its hand. I don't remember what. There were about 10 bowls with candles in them on the floor and on the tables. I was taking in all of this when I heard Susan say, "Jane, come round here. We don't use that room anymore except for special purposes." I went around to the front door and she let me in. There were 3 chairs set up facing the door and 3 people were sitting in the chairs. I recognized her mother as one of the people. Her stepfather, wearing nothing but an open bathrobe, was leaning to one side and drooling. There was another woman seated that I didn't recognize. No one introduced me to her. I smiled and simply said hi to them all. Susan stood off to the side of the half circle of seated people. None of the people responded to my greeting. They all just stared, unsmiling. No one said anything. They seemed to be evaluating me. That's when I got frightened. I thought to myself, are these people going to try and end me? And out here, no one would hear me make a sound. I turned to Susan and say, you ready to go? She was ready, and we left without incident. We had a nice dinner and a nice visit. I asked her about the room and what it all meant, but she said she didn't want to talk about that. After dinner, I drove her home and didn't get out the car. I couldn't get away fast enough. At work the next day, I was told I had a call from Susan, but it was her mother looking for her. I told her I didn't know where she was, and soon after, and unrelated to this, I moved into a different apartment in a nearby town and got a different job. I never saw Susan again. She reached out to me again on some reunion website, but I never responded. I don't know if they were into devil worshipping or something else, but it really frightened me. For a few weeks after that, strange things happened. I would get phone calls where no one would say anything. I was driving along one day and a tire flew off a car in the oncoming lane and crashed into the windshield of the car behind me. They weren't injured, but I wonder if it was all connected to the strange happenings of that house. I work at a multi-billion-dollar retail chain, and besides my main other department, which is also in the back room, there is a second department I'm cross-trained in that I work in for a few hours every Saturday accepting deliveries. Now, I'm of average build, not overweight, but not as slender as I used to be. I have kids, so I have a bit of a mummy tummy that I fought to get rid of for years. I think I look average, but used to get a lot of attention back in the day from young men. Around when I was in my 20s, I'm now in my mid-30s, and thought I looked a little younger. It's not by as much as it used to be. These days, the only guys eyeing me up are 10 years older than me, and usually unattractive too. I'm married, and I'm not looking for a replacement. I love my husband. There's a good variety of delivery drivers who deliver to my store, and I know many of the regulars by name. Every now and then there's a new driver or a substitute driver for one of the companies, but for the most part, it's the same people. So there's a regular driver who comes in every Saturday to deliver milk. We'll call him Mike. He's in his mid-50s, and nearing retirement age for the company he works for. He's friendly and cheerful, and always greets everyone happily, and loves making jokes. He even does the shave and a haircut 2 bits, knock on our bay door when he arrives. I've always thought he was pretty cool, and even said he was my favorite delivery driver since he's so nice. I think he may have gotten the wrong idea though. When I first started there, the other lady who used to substitute in that department warned me that Mike was a terrible flirt and that he liked to try and get with all the ladies. I kind of shrugged it off. I didn't think it was a big deal. Over the past year, he said that I'm his favorite receiving person and that I'm beautiful. He's been very flirty and even asked me out on lunch dates, and I've always declined and told him I was married. This hasn't deterred him in the least. He could care less about that. Mike has gotten friendly enough to show me pictures and videos of trips he's been on and whatnot. Last week he showed me a video of the driveway up his house and views around his 300 acres of land. I thought it was rather odd. I mean, why show someone your driveway and or your land? What was his goal? He started calling me a nickname recently, which no one had ever really called me, as it was something only my creeper dad ever called me. Even my husband knows to steer well clear of the nickname as it triggers me. It's an obvious nickname for my name, but no one uses it, kind of like Mike is a name for Michael or Kate for Caitlin. Well, yesterday, just before he left, he said something I wasn't expecting. Mike asked me if he could shrink wrap me and take me home with him. I gave him a firm but immediate no. This immediately made me think of a murder that happened in my area before I moved out here, where a woman was saran wrapped by her boyfriend and dumped naked, wrapped on the side of a highway. The police were never able to connect the guy to the murder, though the locals knew he had to be the one who did it, and I was told he left the area after that. The more I think of his question, the more creeped out I get. I wonder if I should report it to management, or just tell him to cut the crap out next time I see him as a warning. My company prefers people to tell harassers to stop before reporting an issue. I'm not sure if this falls into that category, or if it's creepy enough to just be something I should report right away. What do you guys think? All I know is I'm really uncomfortable having to see him again next Saturday when he returns. I took my manager aside and told her the situation, and she agreed that it definitely wasn't appropriate, and that she wants a written statement from me on the matter. So we'll see how it's handled. If he stops delivering to my store or stops being creepy, I'll know it's been handled properly. Update. I spoke to my assistant manager on Friday, and she said that it was being handled by ethics, so not at store level. I told her I was thinking of having my supervisor shadow me while the guy was there. Saturday morning came along, and I felt like crap and didn't really want to have to deal with him on top of already feeling tired, so I just called out. Some poor support manager had to deal with him instead. I don't know how long it will take them to address the issue, but I hope it's soon. Update 2. My case is being investigated at store level again. Did the statement and answer questions and whatnot. I won't know anything for a while. Update 3. Today I was anxious and got to work, as I know it's the day the creepy guy delivers milk. The closer it got to 7:30 AM, the more nervous I became. Just before 7:30 AM, I went down to my other work area on the opposite side of the back room. It's a huge store, so that was roughly 600 feet away. When I got there, I discovered that my supervisor wasn't there, as I had feared, and my anxiety only grew. When I got back to my area, there were only a few merchandisers milling about, loading up their products onto carts and whatnot. I didn't see any other managers, including the one I had spoken to earlier in the day, to confirm that he would be present and nearby to give me some sense of security. In a moment of desperation, I thought back to what my co-worker had told me just yesterday, and that was to ask a female co-worker to stay with me and look out for me. So I asked one and she said she would. We waited in the back room, distracting ourselves with meaningless tasks to pass the time. Before I knew it, half an hour went by, and an hour, and then another hour. No milk guy. I went to lunch and thanked my co-worker for humoring me and staying nearby. After lunch, I checked to see if the milk ever came, but it hadn't. I was pretty happy I didn't have to see him for another week at least. Then later I was pulled into the office at the end of my shift. The manager then told me that as of today, Mike is no longer permitted in our store. He can't deliver there or even stop there, so now they have to rearrange our delivery schedule for milk. But I honestly was just so relieved. I told the manager that I felt very relieved and thanked him for letting me know. It was like a weight had finally been lifted off my chest. So, creepy delivery driver that used to deliver to the store, let's never meet again. I just graduated from boot camp. While I was there, some strange things happened to me and some other recruits that we could not explain, and I've come in search of answers. When you are in boot camp, you have to stand watch occasionally for a few hours. I was usually put on watch at night. Me and my partner usually stood watch from midnight to around 2 a.m. My job was usually roving security, which is basically the person who patrols a set area and takes temperature readings and looks for suspicious activity. Usually the most serious thing I deal with were other recruits messing around in the bathrooms and telling them to go back to their bunks. One night at around 2 in the morning, I was making my rounds and thought I heard talking coming from the bathroom. I went inside and heard whispering coming from the showers, so I walked towards them, and what I saw was just weird. I saw a young man, around 17 to 20, hunched over facing away from me in the darkest corner of the shower area. I walked towards him and said, "Hey man, I need you to get back to your bunk." And as I was approaching him, I swear he vanished into thin air in the blink of an eye. I remember the feeling of pure shock and confusion. When I walked out, the other guy on watch asked me why I was so pale, and I told him what happened. I told him exactly what I had seen, and he said it was most likely a result of me being tired from all the stress of boot camp and lack of sleep. I agreed with him because I figured, why would a ghost haunt a shower at boot camp of all places? And I was pretty tired that night. The next day I did not have watch, but the recruit who had my usual shift reported seeing a shadow in the showers and some weird whispering noises while there, despite the fact there was no one. I talked to him and told him what I had seen, and that it was most likely our minds playing tricks on us, because we were all tired. He agreed and decided we should just ignore it. That was until I started seeing things outside the showers. I had a slightly earlier watch that night, and I was patrolling the bunks checking on recruits who were sick, as I'm supposed to. I was walking past some empty bunks and saw some movement from the corner of my eye. I figured it was some recruits messing with me, so I go to tell them to go back to bed. But as I approach the empty bunks, I see some kind of shadowy figure that did not look humanoid to me. It was like a dark blob moving around. When I investigated, it vanished. The area it was in was extremely cold compared to the rest of the room. I just walked away as there was nothing to do there and figured that the staff must have cranked the air conditioning, and I was just tired, making stuff up. I saw this out of the corner of my eye all throughout boot camp while on the early morning watch. The last story for me was from when I was being tasked with taking temperatures throughout the whole building. My job was to go to each division's compartment and ask for their room temperature. I had just taken all but 2 other divisions' temperatures and was looking for the last 2. As I walked past some empty rooms, I could have sworn I saw movement inside, so I figured maybe I missed a room and went to look inside their window. The room was just being used as storage and was pitch black except for the light from outside. All I could see were some boxes and empty bunks, but out of the corner of my eye I saw a person standing in the edge of the light facing me. I saw this and decided I was just going to look elsewhere for the last 2 rooms, which I found a few minutes later. However, as I was returning, I turn, and in my readings I notice in the hallway a shadowy arm or limb being outstretched and coming back behind a doorway, and when I passed, there was nothing, but the area it was in was super cold, and that room was just a closed janitorial closet. The other recruit I previously mentioned spoke about seeing someone dancing in the showers at night, but there being nothing when he investigated. He also said that one night he passed by the showers and saw someone peek out and disappear behind the wall, and there was no one there when he investigated, but he noted the area was really cold. I know I'm going to get called a liar and attention seeker, but I know these are all true. I'm not here to try and fabricate stories or anything like that. I don't want to get into trouble, so I can't disclose where this all happened, but it was very, very spooky. This happened to me when I was 11 and staying at my friend Kit's house. Kit was one of those cool kids in school who was always up to trouble. Looking back, I don't understand how I managed to remain friends with him for so long, as I was anything but cool and never did anything he did. One night, I was staying over at his place one Friday after school, and we started playing touch football in the backyard one-on-one. After playing for about 20 minutes, he asked if I heard of a game called Mop, which I didn't. He explained to me the way the game works is you hide by the road, and when someone walks or drives past, you shout the word mop, hoping to get some kind of reaction. I suppose the game can be known by other names, but he called it mop. I agreed, so we went down to his front yard and looked up and down the road to see if anyone was heading our way. I should note that Kit's house isn't actually on a main road, so the only reason you would drive down past on the left is if you had a house further down or had to turn down an intersection street for more houses. And about 20 houses past Kit's is a bush, so I wasn't expecting many people to pass by. I hid behind the garbage bins, which stand by the driveway fence, and Kit was hiding on the opposite side in the garden. At this point it was 4 PM, so it was still light out, which to me made the game sound less fun. About 2 minutes in, a car drives by and Kit shouts mop. Nothing happened, which was to no one's surprise. I knew someone driving by wouldn't even be able to hear us. Not long after, a man and woman were walking their dog, and as they were about to walk out of sight of Kit's house, he shouts mop. The man and the woman stopped and looked around confused for 5 seconds and then began walking again. That was the exact reaction I was expecting. After about 10 more disappointing reactions, I was starting to get bored, but Kit was just having too much fun. Eventually I noticed a homeless man looking to make his way over. Kit hadn't seen him yet, so I gave him the signal that someone was near and he waited. As the man was getting closer, I could see that he was talking to himself like he was arguing with someone. As he got closer, I saw the man was at least in his 40s. I could see how dirty he looked, with long, greasy black hair, his face covered in dirt, and I was getting nervous. When the man was going past my sight, I heard Kit shout something I was not expecting. He shouts, "Dickhead." The man looks right towards the house in an instant, looking absolutely furious. I was freaking out as the man could have easily spotted me hiding behind the bins. The man started passing back and forth with his eyes fixed on the house, muttering to himself. Eventually he started walking back the way he was heading, and once he was out of view, I got out from behind the bins and made my way over to Kit. I was about to open my mouth to tell him how stupid that was when he said, "Let's follow him." I told him it was a terrible idea, but as a stupid 11-year-old kid, I agreed. We kept following at a distance, and followed him off the road at the entrance of the bush. We hid behind a car and watched the man as he went in. I want to say that we left at that point, but Kit wanted to see where he was going, so we followed. Kit went in first and I followed close behind. I was walking as quietly as possible, but the leaves were all so dry they crunched very loudly. About 5 minutes in of following, Kit stopped dead in his tracks and I heard him mutter, "Oh crap." I walked up to him, and just behind some rocks was the man crouched down looking at us. I didn't have time to react, as the man stood up and sprinted towards us shouting like a madman. Kit and I turned and began screaming. I could just sense the man's presence closing in on me, and I was fearing that at any second he would grab me, and that would be the end of me. Luckily for me, the man tripped and fell. I remember just feeling the air move under the man's body inches behind me. I was easily within an arm's reach. Hearing the man fall, I slowed down, looked back, and saw him lying flat on his stomach, and he let out an angry growl. I turned and continued running. I couldn't see Kit at this point, but I could hear the crunching of leaves and branches, and I knew he was close. Eventually I got out of the bush and started running on the road back to the house. When I got there, Kit was already there, out of breath and sweating. I started crying due to the fear that something terrible may have happened, and I never spoke of this story to anyone. Apparently neither did Kit. I didn't go to his house after that, and my deepest apologies to the man who my friend and I mistreated. I'm a 22-year-old female and used to do DoorDash on the side for some extra cash. This was in the summer of 2018, when it was a little bit newer, at least in my town. Since then, I think they've made a lot of changes, but at the time it was a little unorganized. If you don't know what DoorDash is, it's like a food delivery service, typically for restaurants that don't deliver. Think McDonald's. Anyway, the one night I was doing deliveries all day, I decided to do my last delivery at around 10. So I get an order in and the person wants a medium-sized cheese and pepperoni pizza and loaded potato wedges from a pizzeria nearby. I was kind of wondering why they'd ordered from a pizzeria that delivers, but I figured it's because the place was notorious for taking forever when you order for delivery. I accepted the order and headed to said pizzeria. I got there and picked up the pizza, confirmed on the app that I had picked everything up, and was on my way. The app notified me of the special instructions on the customer's form, which asked for me to call them when I was outside. Okay then, nothing unusual there. Lots of people ask that so that they can come out to get it from me. I get to their address, and it's in downtown. It's a larger apartment building, and it's completely pitch black. I instantly get an eerie feeling. So I pull to the curb, stay in the car. Hell no was I about to go near that building, and call the number. Luckily, DoorDash has this thing that hides your actual phone number. It rings a few times and then this creepy woman's voice comes on the line and says, "We can't get to the phone right now. We're a little tied up," and then creepily giggles. Meanwhile, the entire time in the background, there's another woman screaming, and I mean screaming for help and for her life. It even got louder, as if the creepy woman was purposefully putting the screaming woman on the phone. I instantly hung up and drove off really quick, not even acknowledging which direction to go to. Luckily, there was a super popular restaurant a few blocks away, and I pulled into that parking lot and pulled up the app. I was worried about getting in trouble for not being able to deliver the order, so I contacted DoorDash Help Center and they told me I had to wait 15 minutes to see if they'd call me or message me about their food. Well, they never did. I'm sitting there in the parking lot of the restaurant telling my mum about it, and we agree it's probably just a prank, and just in case it isn't, I should call the police. So I call the non-emergency number and tell them anything. The police tell me they're going to do a wellness check and actually thanked me for calling them to tell them about it. I went home and nothing ever came of it, but I still think about it from time to time. I did get a free pizza and potato wedges, so I thought that was cool. I really hope it was, or some kind of harmless prank. This happened to my dad. I forget where they were stationed, Hong Kong perhaps, but he and his buddy, a seasoned soldier, had some time off, and they decided to see if they could hunt some wild boars which were prevalent where they were stationed. They would be heroes if they returned with a pig or two. As he and his buddy trudged through waist-high bush and tall palm trees, they came to a clearing where they could see off into the distance a whole load of some pretty choice pork out grazing, and their mouths watered. My dad asked, "How do we shoot one without the rest coming after us?" His buddy replies, "You shoot the leader and the rest will run away. Especially if they have babies, they will run away at all costs to protect them." So they watched the pigs for a long time, creeping closer so that they could get a good shot. They both finally decide which one was the leader, and they both took aim and shot him, dropping him where he stood. They waited for the rest of the Saunder to run with them, but they ran towards the two men that ended their leader's life, and my dad's buddy was correct in saying that they would do anything to protect their babies. But they did not back down. They can run up to 30 miles an hour and can weigh sometimes as much as 600 pounds and will fight with everything they have. The soldiers were in a field of waist-high bush with nothing but palm trees, and they threw their rifles and shimmied up two palm trees while the Saunder squealed and gathered around the base. As you can imagine, it was quite difficult to hang onto the trees with no branches to hold onto, especially just a straight trunk. Every time they thought the pigs were leaving, they would get the scent of their dead leader and squeal again and surround the base of the trees. The squealing rarely stopped, and was almost as bad as trying to hang onto the straight trunk of a palm tree. They would get the scent of the guys and would begin their squealing again in earnest. Now you may be thinking, this was just a bunch of wild pigs. What damage could they do? Well, wild pigs were one of the most dangerous animals you have to fight off. Their tusks and teeth are like razor blades and they're fearless, often killing lions that come after their babies. They can throw you off your feet, and then they can use their tusks and very large and hard heads to plunge into you, causing fatalities. This went on for several hours. They would move and the pigs would squeal. Finally, when the pigs were far enough away, they silently shimmied down the trees and ran back to base without slowing down, leaving their dinner and their rifles where they lay. They both had MREs for dinner and never told any of their fellow soldiers about the dinner they almost had that night. The story I'm about to share with you happened a very long time ago. I didn't come from the most affluent family, but they were still generally nice people. The one thing I lacked deeply, however, was a rooted self-confidence. I was never a very attractive girl, the kind that would often get mocked. In any case, this led to some poor life choices later down the line, and that is where the story truly begins. I started hanging out with the ne'er-do-wells at my school, a guy called Brad in particular. I thought he was different, and that he saw me for who I truly was, and not just a slab of meat, like some other guys see girls. However, Brad had certain vices, But nonetheless, I was infatuated, and I wanted to be with him. Reflecting on it now, I'm unsure if he was just with me out of convenience, but we'll get there eventually. We were 16, turning 17. Brad had pretty much free reign of his house. He lived with his mother, who was hardly ever home, and as a wayward 16-year-old boy, started taking narcotics. One of the things he invited me to do was to go live round his house, and after a particularly nasty argument with my parents, I decided I was leaving. I packed my bags and left to live with him. I dropped out of school, and we didn't have any money. His mum would be gone at least 3 weeks, and the little she had left him for groceries was pretty much depleted. But there was one asset in my life that I could use, my car. So I put it to good use and got a job with a friend at a local pizza joint, and started working as a delivery driver. All the money that I earned was pretty much blown on Brad's drug habits. He'd often invite him and his friends over on payday, buy a heap load of stuff, and blow all our money in one hit. I often had to hide some of my money sometimes just so that we could afford to buy groceries. I soon realized that my life was miserable. And after about 2 months of this, I was getting tired of being treated like dirt, and realized I wasn't as valued as I thought I was. I started debating leaving Brad and going home, and telling my parents how I decided to leave school. All things that really scared me, but not as much as what's about to happen to me. It was a regular night. Like I said from explaining my situation, we really needed money. So I was working until the very last shift at the hope of getting a decent tip to really make ends meet this week. I had my aim at $5 more in my tip jar, and then I could go home satisfied. This was the final order of the night. Our pizza joint closed at midnight, and it was about 11:40 when the order came in. So once the pizza was successfully loaded in the back of my car, was I ready to head out and head home right after the delivery. I start making my way. It was a fairly rough area, but unavoidable. We often got deliveries to deliver to this part specifically, so I'm on my way. I'm about 5 minutes from the delivery address when I quickly pull over to consult the sheet of paper where it was written down. I drive for another 5 minutes, and when I'm pretty sure I'm at the address, I'm scanning each and every house, checking the numbers. It was something like 32. I was passing 26, 28, and when I finally get up to 32, the house looks vacant. I start getting a bit creeped out. I wonder if I got the right place or not. Bear in mind, this was before the prevality of cell phones, and I didn't have the luxury of owning one. I'd probably have just driven back to the shop if it weren't almost guaranteed to be closed by the time I get back. As it was a small place, my manager expected me to just give him the money during my next shift. It was sort of cool in that regard. I stop outside the house and ponder for a moment, waiting, hoping that someone will just stroll out when they see a random car parked there and knock on the window for their pizza, but no such luck. I do a deep breath, step out, grab the pizza, and start making my way to the dark front door. The streetlights almost seemed to flicker for a moment, like it was out of a movie. I shudder and bang on the door a few times, calling out, "Pizza delivery!" I wait for a minute, but there's no response. Just as I'm about to head back to the car, feeling quite deflated, do I hear shuffling behind the door. That's when it starts creeping open, but no one comes out. I call out again, but I've already made my way down the first few steps. "Hi, I'm here to deliver your pizza." Nothing. I wait a little while longer to see if anyone's gonna come out, and that's when I hear it. What sounds like a scream come from the upstairs part of the house. I look up and don't see anyone. At this point, I think I'm gonna wet my pants, so just as I'm about to run, does the door open fully, and there's a man there in nothing but socks and underpants. He gives me this most horrific looking grin and starts walking towards me. Bear in mind how poor I am. I really wanted to run, but I also wanted that tip desperately. So I stood there as he approached me and grabbed the pizzas with a friendly smile. He said in a very cold voice, "I'll be back in a sec with the money." I thought deep down that perhaps this had just been a misunderstanding. Maybe he was nice underneath it all, I told myself. That's when out of the bushes nearby jumped 3 dudes wearing ski masks. They all started screaming at me to give the money, but I told them I didn't have any money. They started yelling at me and telling me to move it into the house. This had been some kind of setup. Just before I reach the entrance, does one of the guys stop and pull me back. "Brenda?" He removes his mask, lowers it, and I see it's one of the guys that Brad is always hanging out with. His name was Mark. I just about crapped my pants. I asked him what the hell he was doing and why he was doing that, and he tried to explain that he just needed a little cash and thought he'd get a pizza for free, you know, and tried giving me all this spiel. These were the kind of guys my boyfriend, darling boyfriend, was with all the time. One of the guys who was blowing all our funds on all kinds of illegal stuff. I kind of laughed it off, more out of fear than anything. They never paid me for the pizza, but I didn't care. When I got back home, Brad was asleep, passed out from being high, I'm sure. I gathered my stuff and left. Nearly being robbed, or worse, was the wake-up call I needed to realize I needed to get my life together. So I did. My name is Courtney, and in 2006 my boyfriend Tommy went to jail, and I was left alone in one of the lowest times of my life. I say that because at the time we were both addicted to drugs. I'm almost 2 years clean today, but at the time we were pretty deep in our addiction, and luckily before Tommy got arrested we were renting a room in our friend Christina's grandmother's house. They lived in a town called Tierra Santa, which is a suburban small town in San Diego, California, where Tommy and Christina both grew up. It wasn't just Christina and her grandmother living there though. It was also Christina's brother Michael, her cousin Nicole, and her brother's friend Samuel. It was a very big house. It had 4 bedrooms and a garage that was converted into 2 more bedrooms. We were staying in one of the garage rooms, or I guess at this point, only I was staying there. At the time, me, Christina, and Nicole were all using drugs, and with that lifestyle, usually you have a lot of traffic. Plus, there were 3 other people living there, and everyone besides her grandmother smoked pot. So there were always people coming in and out of the house at any given time, day or night. So I was very used to hearing doors open and close all night without even giving it a second thought. Ever since my boyfriend had been incarcerated, we mostly communicated through letters, but we also spoke over the phone. We didn't get long, mostly just relay important things and tell each other how much we missed one another really quickly. Phone calls in jails are pretty expensive, and we had no real income at the time besides hustling just enough drugs to support our habits, which I came to find was a lot harder to do alone. Anyway, I remember one phone call he had briefly, mentioning that he knew a guy from Tierra Santa named Brett who was in jail with him. It wasn't anything significant, we weren't friends with the guy, In fact, we had an altercation with him the only time I'd actually met him, so I really wasn't fond of him. But it was a pretty big coincidence that he had ended up in the same unit as Tommy. Tommy said Brett apologized to him about the incident we had, and they were sort of getting along now. I didn't blame him because Tommy didn't know too many other people in jail, and I'm sure it was nice to have someone he was familiar with there, even if the guy was a complete piece of... Anyway, about a month after that one afternoon, Christina's sister Nicole came home with a guy who I didn't recognize. At the time, she honestly did this a lot, so I wasn't really surprised, but then I noticed that the guy looked familiar. It was Brett. Brett was always in and out of jail. He would serve a month at a time for small paraphernalia charges or whatever, then he'd be out again into his next jail visit. We didn't say much to each other, basically just hi and bye. Then he went upstairs with Nicole and I went back up to my room, and that was that. Now I don't know if I had mentioned seeing Brett to Tommy or not, because honestly it was hard for Tommy to hear about guys coming over to the house. He wasn't necessarily jealous, but it's hard not to be a little when you're in that position. We have had arguments about it before, and I didn't like to make him stress out more than he already was, or ruin the little time that we had to talk, so I tried to avoid bringing that stuff back up. But looking back on it now, I wish I had said something to him, because he may have prepared me for what was coming. It was about a week later, early morning, and I could hear Nicole, Christina and their grandmother getting in the car and driving off, as well as our other roommate Samuel. So basically I was alone in the house, which was rare, so I figured I would take advantage of the house being empty to get up and do some much needed cleaning and cook some breakfast. So I was in the middle of doing the dishes when I heard it, a voice coming from behind me. "Hey Courtney." Scared and confused, I turned around to see Brett. "I stole some steaks. Do you want to eat?" he asked. I looked confused. "What are you doing here?" "Tom showed me your pictures in jail. You look really good," he said with a creepy smile on his face. At this point I could smell the alcohol on him. I noticed that he was holding a backpack. I just said, "Please get out of here. I have things to do. I'm really busy." "Want a drink?" "No, just leave." I could hear it in his voice. He was wasted, probably hadn't slept in days. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the bottle. And the next thing he said was, "You know, I'm loaded. It's in the backpack." That's when I knew this was serious. "Okay, well, it's way too early to drink, and I'm so tired, and Tom wouldn't be okay with you being here." He said, "Tom won't care. Just make me dinner." He was wasted. All I could think about was the firearm and how I was going to get out of this situation. I was looking for anything I could grab, any options. That's when he began walking towards me. So I started walking the opposite way around the kitchen table that was between us, pretending to clean and telling him, "Seriously, you need to go." That's when he grabbed me and held me down on the table, and he slapped me. He said, "What's wrong with you? Not gonna touch you." So at first I thought those were probably his intentions, but now I knew they were. Inside I was freaking out, but was trying to play it cool, because this was serious, and I was truly scared for my life. He let go of me and started talking about making dinner again, and how pretty I was. I don't recall it all because I was just thinking about what I was gonna do. Then in the corner of my eye I saw him, with the bottle in his hand, cocking it back as if he were going to hit me with it. That's when I got an idea. I needed to play along with him right now. "Oh my god, I need a cigarette," I said, and sped away from him. "Do you want to come smoke with me? And after that I'll make you your steak?" He liked that idea. So I walked outside and lit a cig. The side yard is small. It's just a walkway with a sidewalk and some bricks in front of some plants. So when I saw he was outside, I quickly turned around and squeezed by him, went into the house and locked the door behind me. He was furious. He was yelling to let him back in and started banging on the door. I immediately ran to the front door and locked it as well, and then called the police. I ran back to the side door and showed him that I was on the phone, and he was banging on the door until we realized what I was doing, and then he ran out the side gate. Okay, so side note. This house has had a lot of police calls because, like I said, there have been a lot of drug addicts coming in and out, and we were always getting complaints from neighbors. So believe it or not, even after calling the cops and telling them the guy attacked me and was outside my house banging on the door, they didn't show up for 6 hours. So at that point, we didn't even answer the door. It doesn't end there. A few weeks later, about 9 p.m. at night, I'm sleeping in my room and get woken up by the sound of the door opening. You guessed it, it was Brett. He had come back. This time, the house was not empty, so I just screamed, "Get the hell out my house," and he instantly ran out my room and out the front door. I called the police again, and this time they showed up after only a few hours. When I gave the statement, one of the cops knew Brett very well and told me that on the same day I originally called, they got another call from a few houses down and found Brett passed out from alcohol poisoning on their front lawn. They didn't have a reason to why they didn't show up that day, but they basically made me feel like it was all my fault for not locking the front door that I didn't know was unlocked. Bottom line is they really don't care, I'm sure, because they knew there was drug activity in the house and they were very judgmental. So we got no justice from the police. Next month though, I made sure the doors were locked every night and still didn't sleep well. It was about 3 months after the original incident that I get a call from Tommy with some interesting news. Guess who he ran into in jail? Now, I don't want to give too many details about what happened, but basically after the incident at the house, Tommy told everyone in his pod about it, so they all knew what Brett had done and were waiting for him. So as soon as he landed in the same unit again, everyone got Tommy and basically handed him to Brett on a silver platter. I can't go into too much detail, but I can say that from that night on, Brett spent the rest of his time in jail in the medical unit, and unlike the police in the street, the deputies in jail understood the situation and basically gave Tommy a slap on the wrist. The deputies even said that they would have done the same thing in his shoes. They even helped convince Brett not to press charges on Tommy by saying he could get in more trouble for what he did to me, if only he knew how little the actual police cared. Since that day, Brett has never tried to contact me or Tommy again. It's been about 3.5 years since this happened, and apparently Brett doesn't even use social media anymore or talk or show his face to anyone in Tierra Santa anymore. And thank God for that. Let's never meet again. My story starts when I was stationed in the US Army, in Fort Drum, New York. I lived on a base in a garden-style apartment. Now, I had given someone I knew a spare key to get in if I was away. There had been someone who lived in the upstairs apartment and the two beside me. One night I heard the sound of a rocking chair. I didn't think anything of it until it wouldn't stop. So I, being my short-tempered self, banged on the ceiling with a broom and went back to sleep. Then I heard what sounded like footsteps in my front room. I thought maybe it was just the neighbors upstairs hearing the noise again, so I got out of bed to see if it was the person I knew with my spare keys. Nope, nothing, and no one was out there. I went to turn off my bathroom light and went back to my bedroom and laid back down, then felt that there was a man standing over me. So again I thought it was a friend of mine, but no one was in the room. I don't know what it was about that, but every hair on my body stood on end and I felt chills. I then, bravely, pulled the covers over my head. Then I felt it again, but this time there was a very distinct growling in my ear, almost like a large dog or wolf perhaps. It freaked me out. I jumped up, slammed on my bedroom door and locked it. Luckily it was a Friday and I didn't have to go in the next day. Freaky, right? I've tried to remain skeptical about this, even though it's not the first experience I've had. The first job I had was at a pizza place in my hometown. It's a really small town with a little over 1,000 people. We were right next to a main highway that's about 30 minutes away from a major city. One night around September to October, I'm working with 2 other co-workers and our manager. The whole shift had been pretty slow, and we were getting ready to close at 9 p.m. Around 8:30, 2 men and a little girl of around 8 come in, and I go up to the front and ask them if they need help with anything or if they're going to place an order. The shorter one of the 2 men says that they're just passing through. He then asks about the prices of the different items on the menu, and he also asks at which time we close. I answer, and he just says okay and walks away to sit down with a little girl at a booth. The taller man then leaves the building and gets into the car parked out front. The smaller man gets up about 5 minutes, whispers something to the little girl, then leaves. My co-worker and I are watching all of this go down and talking about how strange it is. The little girl gets up and starts dancing around to the radio station we have playing. After a few minutes of this, I walk up to her and ask her if she's hungry or if she wants a drink. She says she only wants a water, which I get for her, and she takes it back down to the booth and sits down. I ask her who she was waiting on, and she says her dad. My co-worker and I are starting to get worried for her because the 2 men haven't returned yet and it's 8:50. We start to think that neither of them are her father at all. My manager decides to call the police. Our town is too small to have our own police station, so we have to wait for them to come from the next town over, which takes roughly 15 minutes. I go sit with her at the booth and am making small talk with her, trying to make sure she's safe and nothing happens before the cops arrive. In the middle of our conversation, she gets up and says she has to leave. My manager and I are telling her she needs to stay in the restaurant until her dad comes back, but she starts crying and screaming and insists on leaving. A few days later, my manager says the cops found her walking down the road alone late that night. We never heard any more information about that situation afterwards. I just hope she's safe now wherever she is. Camp Dragoon in Iraq had weird things happen in different places. The camp was just an old Saddam regime secret police complex, so plenty of people disappeared there, just to add to the horrific background. The underground tunnel torture chambers had been walled off early, but people who went down there often reported the feeling of being watched. I took pictures in an old prison and weird balls of light showed up, and when I got them developed by the locals, I chalked it up to there being dust in the air. The one thing that happened over and over though, were the lights in the buildings appearing where they shouldn't be. I was part of the quick reaction force for the camp and was called out many times to look for intruders. We had an apartment building on our camp, unused but off limits, and at least once a month a guard tower, the Tactical Operations Center, or random people would report faint lights moving within. Every time we got spun up and cleared the whole building, but not even the dust had been disturbed. People being tired, reflections, soldiers being sneaky, I don't know, but it's weird and unexplained. I won't spread any of the National Training Center ghost stories I've heard, as they didn't happen to me, and they could be just legends at this point, but it sure as hell was freaky at the time. Back when I delivered pizzas in my small college town, I used to have to deliver to some pretty remote places. One weekend I was delivering to a house, which was about a mile outside our delivery range. But it was a slow night, and I was saving up tips for a trip in the summer, so I told my boss I would do it. The house was near impossible to find. It was deep in the woods, dark outside, and the driveway was completely overgrown. There was very little cell service too, so my GPS wasn't functioning properly. I passed it 4 times before seeing a very hidden mailbox which indicated the house. I got out of my car and went to the front door, knocked a few times but there was no answer. It didn't look like there were any lights on in the house, but the window blinds were drawn, so it was hard to tell. I could clearly hear what sounded like someone running up and down the stairs over and over. I thought it might be a dog at first, but there was no barking. After about a few minutes of this, I began to feel something was off, and became extremely aware of how dark it was, how quiet it was, and how remote I was right now. I determined this dude's crappy trip wasn't worth the agitation and decided to head back. I went back to my car, screamed, and dropped the pizzas. There was a kid, probably 11 to 12, sitting on the hood of my car. I have no earthly idea where he came from. He had on a light grey hoodie which, combined with the darkness, gave him the look of a spectre. I picked up the pizzas and gathered myself, and yelled out asking if he lived here and ordered the pizzas. The kid immediately jumped off the hood of my car and sprinted into the woods away from the house. I got in the car ready to knock the hell out of there. When I reversed out the driveway right before I pulled into the street, I saw a kid emerge from the woods, again, standing on the driveway, watching me leave. I got back to the store and told my boss what happened. He was angry I didn't make more of an attempt to deliver the pizza, but I talked him into calling the house to confirm the order. No one picked up after 4 attempts. My boss stopped accepting calls outside our delivery zone after that, more so out of not wasting his driver's time than our safety, as this dude was an arse. We never got a call from that house again for the 2 remaining months that I worked there. At the time, I was still at Fort Sill for some training. It was an interesting place to be. We would spend the weekends sitting around playing video games or going on liberty to explore the only mall in town, Lawton. Occasionally, we would be selected for Firewatch or duty. One Saturday, I had Firewatch. Not a big deal. I decided I'd chill in my room for most of it and make myself be seen every now and then. We had a gym below the main floor, and we would spend a lot of time in that gym. Firewatch was sometimes tasked with cleaning it up. There was a small walled-off section though. It used to contain an electric chair. I'm still unsure of the history of the building we were in, but it was next to a large cemetery. We would hear the occasional creepy story about the building and the electric chair, but I digress. That night I was asked to clean the gym, and then to mop the 3rd deck. At the time, no one lived on 3rd deck. My buddy and I cleaned the gym and walked up the stairs to mop. He mopped from the end to the middle, and I proceeded to mop the rest of the way to the stairs. We finished mopping, and my friend went to go skate in his room, while I told duty we were done. I walked back up the stairs to grab the mop bucket. I got up there and realized someone had walked all over the floor that we just mopped. So I looked down the hallway when I saw a humanoid-like figure, except it was pitch black. The pitchiest black I've ever seen. I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me, something I've never felt before, and I sprinted down the stairs and into my room, waking up my roommate. He thought I was messing with him when I told him what happened. After that, I never saw the figure again while I was there. It was honestly one of the most scariest experiences of my life. I used to be a delivery driver, which doesn't sound very interesting because it isn't. I did have to deliver to some very remote places though. One time I delivered to a trailer park just barely inside our designated delivery zone, and it was very dark and poorly lit. I'm leaving my car running and keep the headlights and inside lights on to go to deliver the pizza. Upon returning to my car, I sat down in the driver's seat and look up to see a creepy old man standing less than 3 feet away from my side of the car. He was just staring. It was the equivalent of a jump scare. I just started driving forward, had to do a U-turn to get out of the park, and when I turned around, the man was standing in the middle of the road. So I freaked out for a second while I sped around him, only to watch him attempt to chase my car out the trailer park. I put in my 2 weeks' notice after that. I am a 20-year-old male and was born and raised in central London. I am very familiar with the potential dangers in central London, and I'm usually a very cautious person and tend not to find myself in sketchy situations. On this day, however, I knew I had no one to blame but myself for having allowed myself and the love of my life to be in a scenario of potential danger. Having grown up in Central, you quickly learn which areas to avoid, as you do in a very big city. And being as cautious as I usually am, I knew better than to have been where I was at that time of day. Me and my current girlfriend Mia had been hanging out early on in our relationship, and one thing we loved to do was meet up after work, and seeing as it was summer and the sun was still out until quite late in the evening, we would hang out in one of London's biggest parks, Hyde Park. We would usually stay in the more populated areas of the park, and would sometimes have a drink while we enjoyed the sunset together, sitting on the grass or by the lake. On this evening we were doing exactly that, just sitting on the grass, and we had a small bottle of vodka that we were sharing between us. We felt like having a drink, seeing as we had had a stressful week at work and were just chilling. For some reason though, this evening had a strange vibe to it. I remember me and my girlfriend talking about her grandmother, who she told me believed in tarot card readings and had done a reading for her before she left her country to move to London. And during the reading, her grandmother had told her something along the lines of, "In London you will find happiness and it's somewhere you need to be." But that also something really bad was to happen to her while she was here. And for some reason this put me on edge, seeing as we were still in the early stages of our relationship. And not to say I generally believe in any of those things, but I'm not necessarily a non-believer either. The sun was starting to go down, and it got to a point where we were both sort of buzzed from the vodka, and at this point I guess we were both feeling some tension, and both of us had the same look in our eyes, as if to say, let's find somewhere quiet to be alone. And this was when in retrospect the cautious side of me should have been the dominant force and told me to quit it. Wrong time and place. But no, instead both of us were thinking differently. Now I know parks at night in London are known to be the safest places, with the odd crackheads here and there, and usually the sketchy stuff goes down in the middle of the night. So I never really hung out in parks until late. As we both decided to look for somewhere quiet to chill in private, we walked deeper into Hyde Park towards a more sort of forested area, with a huge mansion-style building and a dimly lit path for cyclists and pedestrians. There were a bunch of trees over to the side in pitch darkness, where we thought, okay, this looks fine, and there's a big building 100 meters that's fairly lit, albeit no one to be seen, so it seems secluded enough for possibly to hang out in peace, but not so secluded that anything sketchy will go down. As we stepped off the path into the trees, we walked deeper into the trees, and Mia pulled on my arm. "Babe, I saw something move over there." Then she pointed to some trees and bushes about 20 meters away. "I think I saw someone walking." This is when I was being as cautious as I usually am, and I should have said nope and made a U-turn and left, but no, I told her to wait, got the flashlight from my phone out, and walked over to where she said she'd seen someone. I walked around and didn't see anyone or anything, so I walked back over to her and we agreed it was probably shadows from the trees playing tricks on her imagination. After checking a couple of trees with low-hanging branches, we found one we thought we could sit under, and the branches were hanging really low, right down to the ground, and it created a sort of perimeter around us, where anyone walking down the lit path would be unable to see us. We could see out of the foliage and branches, and could see lights from the main road faintly on the opposite side of the park, as we were really deep in the less populated side of the park at this point. All in all, once we had arrived, I'm pretty sure she and I were both no longer feeling as romantic as we were before, and we felt quite on edge. We're sitting down against a tree trunk, with her on my lap. We were making out, and I felt we were really relaxed at this point, and the shadows that we had seen before were slowly slipping back into the recesses of our minds. We were sharing a kiss when a strange feeling compelled me to open my eyes, and as I did I noticed the silhouette of what in that split second my brain associated to be two thick branches from the lower hanging branches, but they caught my attention as my brain began to process that they were not what I thought they were. They were in fact a pair of legs. As I followed those pair of legs, I saw the silhouette of a hooded man standing there not moving a muscle. And even though it was pitch black, I was sure I could feel this man's gaze. He was staring directly at us. My heart skipped a beat. Somehow I managed to just keep calm enough to whisper in her ear, "Babe, there's someone watching us. Get up." I don't think she really understood me, but understood enough to turn around to see what I was talking about. And at that point she screams, but the man doesn't move and doesn't flinch. He doesn't react, and it's probably the most frightening part of this encounter. Normally when someone's up to no good, upon being caught they would react in some way, whether in panic or run. But instead, nothing. He stood there staring at us without a word. Just as she screamed, I told her to get up, and so did I. And I moved in front of her, almost waiting for some sort of reaction from the man, or expecting someone else to jump out from somewhere. I'm waiting to see what his move is so that I can react. I was split between confronting him, making a run for it, or waiting for him to make his move. In those 10 seconds of indecision, he slowly turns to his left and begins walking away, seemingly unbothered. And this was the moment I saw fit to get Mia and myself from out under the tree onto the lit path, while doing so not taking my eyes off what I could still see of the man through the trees. I could see his legs walking until he seemingly just vanished. Once we reached the path, my first thought was to grab the bottle of vodka we had from earlier, knowing we had to follow the path towards the exit from the park, or at least to a more populated section of it. The direction of the path also being the direction the creepy man had seemed to walk in. Hence, me holding onto the glass bottle of vodka, thinking that if things go from bad to worse, at least I can attempt to use it as some sort of protection. We follow the path, Mia holding me tightly. My awareness levels have now shot through the moon, head on a swivel. Having followed the path for what felt like an eternity, we finally reached civilization and left the park. Every now and then I still get flashbacks of the image of the silhouette of the man just standing there staring. I've thought about what his intentions could have been, and many things come to mind. But one thing that I am certain of are that his intentions were far from good. Since then, neither of us have returned to any park at night, nor have we gone to secluded areas of any park for any reason. A lesson learned. That could have been easily avoided. Seeing as I wasn't oblivious to potential threats and dangers in parks at night. I've always known better, and I deeply regret having allowed myself to be put in a position, along with someone I deeply care about, where she or I could have been harmed. I appreciate this story may be a little anticlimactic, and isn't as scary to many of you listeners as it was for us, but it certainly scared the hell out of us, and to this day the image of the motionless silhouette standing there staring at us in the dark has not left my mind. I joined the US Marines in the year 2000, and by 2003 I was in Iraq. While in Iraq, we had stopped at an RRP, repair and replenish point, and dug in for the night. That night there was no moon, and couldn't see any bright stars in the sky, so it was ridiculously dark. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I was sitting in my dug position using night vision goggles to keep an eye out for insurgents, when I heard the loudest and scariest scream coming out of the darkness. Then it got closer, but it became clear as the scream was above our heads. There was something flying above us or hovering that would every several minutes scream in a loud, screeching and frightening way. I can't even give it justice on how frightening this scream sound was. A couple of us heard it, but the weird thing is that not everyone that was awake could hear it. I tried to convince myself that it could have been a local bird or some type of owl screech, I even googled many different owl calls just to try and find something that sounded similar with no luck. Till this day I still have no idea what I heard. Someone told me that it could have been a banshee, but I truly don't know. Has anyone who's ever served in Iraq heard anything similar? One night, I had a delivery to a pretty rural area. A lot of my deliveries are to rural areas, so no big deal. But tonight is drizzling and especially dark, so I'm having trouble finding the address of the house I'm looking for. So I roll down the passenger window to use my really bright flashlight, pointing it at mailboxes, trees and posts and anything that anyone might have their address on at the end of their driveway. I'm driving along at 5 miles an hour, pointing my flashlight, when the beam catches a guy wearing a dark hoodie at the end of an obviously long gravel road staring directly at me. More of a glare really, but whatever. He could just be on his phone or something. Anyway, it gets weirder. I finally find the address I'm looking for and pull up into the drive and hop out the car. That's when I get the sinking feeling. No cars, no house lights, boarded up windows. If you've ever been a delivery person, you know that this is the time to get the hell out of there because you are about to be robbed. Right as I'm about to jump in and throw the car in reverse and note the hell out of there, I see a man walking across the empty field adjacent to the property towards me. Crap. Now I'm a pretty burly bearded dude, so I don't worry a whole lot on deliveries, but this scared the hell out of me. When he gets closer, I see him very obviously tucking something into his waistband. What I can only assume was a firearm. He then says in a thick, menacing southern accent, "I thought you was the law." I guess because of how I was scanning the addresses. I meekly point my car topper and the pizza in my hand, and he says in the nicest voice you've ever heard, "Oh great, thank you so much. Have a great night." Pays me, and proceeds to walk back through the open field in the direction of no buildings in the rain with his pizza. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't stop whispering, "What the hell?" It was the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. I was in the Marines from 2008 to 2012. I served as an infantry Marine and was stationed in 29 Palms, California. In 2009, while training for my first deployment, we went to a special school called MCCWMWS, Marine Corps Cold Weather Mountain Warfare School, which was located in Bridgeport, California. I enjoyed the 5-ish hour bus ride up Highway 395 through the Sierra Nevada mountains. I took in the beautiful scenery as my mind wandered about what I was in for, dreading climbing the 12,000-foot plus mountains that littered the landscape. Weeks of training go by. I was relieved to hear that we were moving to a place called Hawthorne to do some live fire exercises, which was about 30 miles away to the east back into the desert. An old out-of-commission army base that was deemed uninhabitable in the 50s for various reasons. I was enthusiastic to escape the bitterly cold temperatures up the mountain, and I slept on the ride there. Upon waking up, I looked out the window and was shocked at what I saw. Remnants of the old base scattered the landscape, half-destroyed buildings, guard towers, and other typical military stuff you'd expect to see. Behind that lied a jagged lava rock mountain, casting their shadows over the destroyed buildings. The place looked like a nuclear bomb had gone off nearby. Have you ever seen the old nuclear test video from when it was first developed? They would stage a fake town to analyze what the blast would do. This place was like that, mixed with the game series Fallout and Chernobyl. As we drove in further, I noticed a bunch of mine shafts heading into the side of the mountain. Now I was very curious as to where we would be staying at, and I was relieved to hear there was a makeshift FOB, Nothing fancy by any means, just an old green tent for the NCOs and upper-ranking battalion staff. Us boots would be sleeping under the stars in the dirt. At least we had a makeshift Hesco wall around us to make things feel a little bit more like home. During chow that evening, we were all sitting around just chatting, and I asked my sergeant what all the mine shafts in the hillsides were for. He said that they were munition storage facilities as well as fallout shelters. The base was designed and built in the Cold War era, which made it super creepy. It's like all the people just decided one day to leave. Vehicles were still there and everything. It was really strange. Night arrives. It was fairly hot out even though it was night, as we were back down in the desert. I was having problems sleeping even though I was just in my skivvies on top of my sleeping bag. Some of the others were awake, chatting, and then I stared into the stars and mountains looming over me. It was a full moon that night with hardly any clouds. As I was scanning the mountain tops, which I had to guess were 500 to 700 feet above me, from where we were sleeping, it made it seem like I could almost reach out and touch the top. I saw something strange moving about at the peak, figuring my eyes were playing tricks on me. From extreme physical exhaustion and sleep deprivation, I disregarded it. Even later that night, I awoke to take a leak. As I'm utilizing the head, I look up to where I saw something earlier, and to my surprise, the strange silhouetted figures were there scurrying about the ridgeline. Now this had definitely caught my interest as my mind was wandering. Thankfully, I had a lot of really cool stuff lying in my backpack at the biovac site. Once at my gear, I grabbed my trusty PVS night vision monocular. I bring them to my eye and look back up. Nothing. That can't be right. Like, huh? I swear I saw something. I look over to my buddy that was still awake and asked, "Hey, did you see something up there?" He looked at me like, "What the hell are you talking about?" I told him to forget about it. A few hours go by, and through the night, a loud crash comes from the closest mine shaft, which is located about 100 feet or so from the FOB. Literally half of the platoon sat up straight from a dead sleep. One of the sergeants screams from a nearby tent and says to hit the rack. It was just some rocks falling, which made sense for most of us. The next morning we woke up and did what we had planned to do for the day. Later that afternoon we had some free time and were creeping around checking the nearby buildings out. 4 of us decided to go down into a building. It was half above ground and half below. The wide staircase went down to an open large cubicle type area. Barely any light came through the small windows. I clicked my weapon light and scanned the area. There were still papers and everything strewn about on top of desks. We followed the hallway, which made a turn. MOPP suits and gas masks lined the hallway, hanging on hooks. We see a sign above one of the doorways that said, "Girls' Locker Room." Us, being the typical 19-year-old Marines that we were, decided to check that out. I took point and entered the pitch-dark room. I was looking through the lockers trying to find anything interesting, when all of a sudden, the doors behind us slammed shut, and we all ran the hell out of there. 2 doors on either side of the room, with lockers lining the sides. That's my life story. First, I have to tell you that I've never been in trouble with the law, and I've never stolen anything in my life. This is relevant to the story. This all occurred in the summer of 2014 when I was 16. I live in the second largest town in Washington state, but still a relatively small town by most of America's standards. Our first Walmart supercenter was still relatively new in 2004 and was only 10 to 15 minutes away from my house, so my family and I went there quite a bit for most of our needs. We got to know most of the employees, and we had never had a problem with any of them until one day I noticed someone following me. Okay, I thought that's odd, but didn't think too much of it and continued shopping with my family. But whenever I got that feeling, this one guy would always be around. I told my family what was going on, so we would all keep an eye out for this weird guy. He didn't look weird or out of the ordinary. He was probably in his mid to late 20s, about 5'6", average build, red hair, goatee, and he usually wore a baseball hat. We figured out that he was one of those security secret shopper people that a lot of retail stores hire. Well, this continued for about a month or longer, but as time went on, the creepy guy got more confident. Not only was he following me, but he was peeking through racks of clothes, between shelves at the end of aisles, and darting in and out of aisles between me. It didn't even matter to him that my family was always with me. My mum wouldn't let me go anywhere in the store alone. Not that I wanted to. I was a scared little 16-year-old girl, and I wasn't about to go anywhere without someone with me. It got to the point where we were afraid he would wait until I left the store to follow me to our car and perhaps follow us home. Thank goodness that never happened, but who knew what the guy was capable of? My mum and I decided to confide in one of the cashiers that we'd gotten to know really well. She walked around with me and the guy was nowhere to be found. Needless to say, she didn't believe me and thought I was insane. The day finally came when everything blew up, figuratively speaking. My mum, both my older sisters, my very little niece who was only a few months older than I, had to go to Walmart. The trip to the store started out okay with no sign of the creepy dude anywhere. So I was having a pretty good time when the feeling of being watched came and my head began spinning. I thought, oh no, not him again. There he was peeking at me, darting through the aisles, you know, the usual. We hurried and got our things and went to checkout. Mr. Guy had never followed me to the cash register before, but he did that day. I was standing there waiting for the cashier to finish ringing up our things when my mum noticed him in the women's clothing aisle near to where we were checking out. My mum had enough. She walked a little closer to him and asked him angrily, "What the hell do you think you're doing following my daughter around? If you don't leave her alone, I'll call the cops." He then replied, "I can follow and watch whoever I want." So my mum stomped over to the register fuming, paid for our things and loudly said, "That's it, we're getting a manager." So my family and I went to customer service, and while my mum was demanding a manager, the cashier was snooty and acted like I was in the wrong, go figure. I kept scanning my surroundings to find him. It was 10 minutes before the manager showed up, and when we finally did, my mum and I explained what had been going on, and offered for him to look through our pockets, purses and things. He refused and said he believed us. He got the assistant manager and asked me to walk around the store where they'd followed the way behind to watch what happened. Sure enough, the creepy guy starts following me and they catch him red-handed. They took him to the back room and that was the last I saw of him. It took me a long time to go anywhere alone again after that. I thank God I have such a supportive mum and family, otherwise it probably could have ended much differently, because I wouldn't have had the support and protection I did. Please be aware of your surroundings, even in places you think should be safe. And to the creepy guy, let's not meet. When I was in Vilseck, Germany, the Rose Barracks, as part of the 1st Infantry Division, I had an interesting run. This was about the year 2001, and not so long after a long deployment in Kosovo. I was an E4 about to be promoted to sergeant and had a fellow NCO who named his Humvee Area 51. He told me he had been stationed there for a while as part of a security team, made up of Army and Air Force. He told me lots of bizarre stories about the things he saw and the rumors. He then introduced me to a website called the Black Vault. The website is still around, but far less conspiracy-driven these days, and it contained a lot of conspiracy theory stuff, Freedom of Information Act material about various UFO projects like the Blue Book project. With hindsight, it was probably a bad idea to look at this stuff on a government computer at work. He and I both had a series of encounters with military intelligence, and even an actual CIA spook over the next year. They went through my living quarters while I was at work, trailed us, and a year later I PSC'd, relocated to the National Guard in Texas, and it all ended. But it was a strange amount of attention to receive about a subject that's nonsense to our government. I used to deliver pizzas for a pizzeria in Cape Town, South Africa, when I was in university to make extra cash. I used to deliver to the same house quite often. Incidentally, this place was quite close to where I lived at the time. There was nothing overtly strange about this place, except that whoever would receive the pizzas would normally take quite a long time to come to the door, and would always ask me to pass them pizza through the security gate instead of unlocking it and making it easier for everyone involved. One quiet night, a call comes through for this house, and I collect the pizzas and get to the house reasonably quickly. This time a lady who I'd never seen before is at the house. She opens the door and lets me in. It's not entirely uncommon to be let into a customer's house, so I don't think anything of it. She points me towards the kitchen, which is down quite a long corridor, and asks me to drop the pizzas off there. She follows me all the way, still nothing weird. The passage opened up to an open-plan dining room and lounge area. Through this area is the kitchen through a door on the left. As I was passing through the dining room/lounge area, I saw something that sticks with me to this day. An old-looking dentist chair, with a person lying in it. Whether the person was alive or not, I still don't know. He had a sheet covering his whole body, except the very top of his head and his feet, which were duct-taped together. I couldn't tell if he was breathing or not. The lady that opened the door was still right behind me. She said absolutely nothing. We went into the kitchen and she paid me for the pizzas. At this point, I was either expecting to be attacked by this lady, or someone else hiding somewhere, or to be scared by the guy under the sheet as some part of a practical joke. Not wanting to give anything away, I didn't say anything, and prepared myself to either defend myself or not be frightened should it be a joke. I walk out towards the front door, double-checking to see what I saw was correct and not just my imagination. The lady, still behind me all the way, closed the door behind me as I left, and said nothing. To this day, I still have no idea what was happening in that house. It could have just been some joke, but I really don't think it was. The presence of a dentist's chair still makes no sense, and I didn't see anything else that would suggest the residents of the house collected weird paraphernalia. I drive past that house quite often, and still wonder if I was in any real danger. I'm in the Navy and work on an aircraft carrier. A girl sadly ended her life in one of the spaces right near where me and my shop slept. One person swore he saw her sitting in the chair as he was getting undressed one day and ran screaming out of the berthing. I waited about a week to go into the space where she ended her life, and when I did, I heard the loudest screeching noise I'd ever heard in my life. I quickly turned around and got the hell out of there. The system connected to where she slept didn't work at all for the next 2 weeks. The system breaks a lot, so it was pretty coincidental that it happened just as she did this. I went to go play Smash Bros. Ultimate a while back, when they were doing the Nintendo holiday in America. Since I live in New York, I had to go to Queens Mall to play the game. It was Black Friday, and I saw the perfect opportunity to play the game as long as I wanted. My theory was right, so I decided to spend time walking around the mall since I didn't have to rush. Anyone who lives in New York can tell you about the people on the subway and buses who sell candy to fund whatever it is. Well, there was someone like that in the mall who tried to sell me Airheads. I immediately said no. I had no singles and I don't buy from these people anyway, but he persisted. I noticed there was a dribble of spit on his lip. It was pus-colored, so I made the assumption he was probably a user. He tried to change things by asking me if I had singles. I made sure a mall cop was in sight when I said no, and then he tried to tell me he could trade his singles for my bills. I would then make things easier for him by doing so, but I said no again and decided to walk in a circle around the same place. But he paid no mind. He tried to guilt trip me because we were both black, but I don't have empathy or sympathy, so that wouldn't work. I finally decided to entertain him and trade my 10 for 10 singles. He took out his singles and counted them, and I watched him count to 13 and trade me the singles. I did the classic "I don't let go until you let go" tactic, and he stopped. He told me he was about to hand me 13 and that I was trying to scam him. I told him he was the one who counted, and he redid it. I watched him count 10 singles and he stopped and said I was trying to scam him without me even touching them. He counted again, and I did it loud as well. This was when we were both getting annoyed. I yelled at him that he had 10 in his hand, and that was what he was about to give me. But he asked me how because he had 13 singles, and I told him that 10 were in his right hand and 3 were in his left. That had made up the 13, and all he had to do was give me the money in his right hand, but he wasn't having any of it. He got pissed off and sped walked quietly away, and he followed me onto an escalator and tried to tell me really quietly, "Listen, I'm not afraid to mess you up here, got it?" I just replied, "Sure." I finally got him to leave by saying, "Alright dude, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I've got no interest in this anymore, leave me alone." He left without a word, and I considered telling Mort security, but I decided it wasn't worth it. If he came to me again, I'd make sure everyone knew, though I was cautious to make sure he wasn't following me around the store for the rest of the day. Creep. I am a corporal in the Army Cadets. Once we were out on Fieldcraft, which is a combat exercise down in Yorkshire. I'm Scottish, by the way. During our 2-week annual camp, we were in a harbour area, which is basically our camp for the duration of the exercise, and then we'd go back on base after the 3-day exercise. It was around 10 PM. We were waiting to receive contact from the adult instructors. I was on stag with my mate called Tom, and we were sitting talking while observing the forest around us, and we got contact, so we returned fire with blanks. And throughout the chaos of the engagement, I saw a white figure near some of the trees. It was around 6 foot tall, and at the time I put it in the back of my mind until the engagement was over. I asked Tom if he had seen it, and his face went white. He thought he was just seeing things. We then asked the other guys in our section, and they said that they'd seen it too. The next day of the exercise, nothing happened, and I still have no idea what that was. A few days ago, I ordered a delivery service via an app called Rappi that works in South America, where I live. And to be able to get the delivery, you obviously have to give the details like your cell phone number and house address. When I received the delivery, the guy started flirting with me and began asking me weird questions. I told him I was only 16, hoping that he would leave me alone, but he just tried to keep making conversation. But I told him to have a good day and shut the door. Fast forward to yesterday in the afternoon. Someone called my house phone number. Keep in mind that I don't give out that information in my app, and my mum picked up the phone and the man told her that he wanted to talk to me, calling me by name. She asked who he was, and he told her he was one of my school friends. My mum gave me the phone and the man told me who he was and gave me his name, which later turned out to be fake, and said I was very hot and that he wanted to meet up with me. I immediately hung up the phone. I started looking through the Rappi app and see if there was some way to report this guy, but I couldn't find anything. Then I tried to search in the delivery history and couldn't find anyone with the name he told me. I'm really creeped out right now because I don't know how he found out my house phone number, and he also knows exactly where I live. It's a pretty tricky situation. I just hope he never tries to reach out to me again. To set the scene, this story is from about 5 years ago, give or take a few months. I was 19, living in a very large city in the southern US, population nearly 2 million, with several military installations. I was dating a guy who at the time was in the army and stationed on the joint base nearest to where I was living. I had a full-time job and was also in school, but all of my free time was spent with my boyfriend, and since he was in training at the time, he didn't have a car, so I was on and off that base constantly, and had gotten to know the gate guard. I still had to present my visitor pass and ID every time because of protocol, but they knew me. The base itself is huge, like its small little town in of itself. Driving onto the base by accident is impossible. There are a few entrances, but I usually used the second biggest one. To get there, you drove down a 5-lane road with 2 lanes each way and 1 turning lane. As you approach, there's a huge golf course that's part of the base, as well as our national cemetery, so huge fences and large signs stating it's government property. And to the right, some businesses, restaurants, barbers, dry cleaners, gas station, as well as a few residential neighborhoods with smaller side streets. But as you get closer to the gate, there's really nowhere to go except to the base, unless you're going to the physical rehab center / senior living center that's on the right, and literally the last place to turn in before you're going through the gates. The road leading into the base is really long, so as you go further away from the base on the same road, there's more businesses, more neighborhoods and more apartments, an HEB and a Walmart, both roughly 3 to 5 miles give or take from this gate. I also happened to use this road when I was going straight from work to pick up my boyfriend, as there's an exit from the interstate and is the most direct route. So I was just heading down the road, and one thing I'll note is that I'm pretty careful as a driver, since I got into a terrible car accident with my mum when I was 12 and was severely injured. I drive a little faster than the speed limit, but not too much, and always try and move out of the way for people going faster than me, because I know it can be annoying to be stuck behind someone driving slowly. I was about 2 miles from the base in the right-hand lane when I come up on someone slowing down to take a turn. I checked my mirrors, flicked on my blinkers, and went to make a lane change to go around them. There had been an old clunky blue van, like a Chevy Astra or something, in the left lane, but it was still pretty far back, and I was planning to move back to my lane anyway, as soon as I passed the car in front of me. Mr. Astro didn't like me getting into his lane when I was going slower than he was. Again, he was far enough back that if he maintained his speed, I'd have been back over before he even reached me, but no. I heard an engine rev, and all of a sudden this dude was right on my bumper, laying on his horn, making the typical rude gestures you'd expect. I've always been rather meek and quiet, and hate confrontation, so I was going to pull back into the right lane and get back over once I passed the car in front of me. But by then there was another car in that lane trying to speed past everyone, so I couldn't move over immediately. As I waited for the other car to pass by so I could move into the right lane, the Astra behind me is speeding up on my tail and then backing off just to speed up onto my tail again. The other car passes, and I move into the right lane so the Astro can pass me. He sped up and then slowed so he was driving right next to my car. I glanced over, and this older looking dude with raggedy hair and a dirty, ratty looking beard just stared over at me, still making rude gestures, and then made a gun sign with his hand and pointed his fingers at me and mimicked shooting me in the head. This really freaked me out, but not as much as when he slowed down even further and got right behind me again. This road could really be trafficky during rush hours, but I'd gotten off work early, around 3:45, so the traffic wasn't bad and he definitely did not need to be behind me anymore. There was so much room for him to just go around and leave behind me. Obviously freaked out, I tried to shake him. I changed lanes, but he followed. I slowed down, so he did. And so I got back into the right lane, coming up on a light that had just turned yellow, and made a pretty risky, very quick right turn onto that road, hoping he wouldn't be able to follow me. He apparently didn't care, and took the turn right after me. I remember looking in my rearview mirror and seeing the van practically leaning on the turn, and he was still yelling and making hand gestures. I took some more turns and started weaving through a neighborhood trying to lose him, but he was persistent. Finally, a moment of clarity hit me when I took a sharp turn and my visitor pass for base slid off the front seat. Duh. I wove through the neighborhood until I got back to the road we had been on, the one that leads straight to the base, and I booked it down that road with Mr. Astro right behind me. I saw him in my rear view as I pulled up to the gate and was terrified to see him pull in behind me. I thought there was no way this guy could follow me onto the base. At the time, they were in FPCON Bravo, which means no one could drive on base unless they had proper military staff ID or a 30-day visitor pass plus driving license. Luckily, I knew the guard at the gate. I pulled in, and he could tell I was a bit frazzled because my hands were shaking as I handed him my pass and ID. Before he could ask, I said, "The guy in the car behind me is really scaring me. He's been following me for 15 minutes and making hand gestures and yelling, and he made finger guns like he was going to shoot me." The guard was super nice, smiled and nodded, and acted like everything was okay. Didn't even glance back at the van, and he told me, "Okay, don't you worry about it. You're in safe hands now. The guy won't get anywhere near you. Is your boyfriend done for the day?" I said, "No, I don't think he's done until 4:30. I was just going to read in my car until he finishes." He told me to go about with my plans, to head over to my boyfriend's barracks, and he and the other guards could handle it. I did exactly what he told me to do. My boyfriend's barracks weren't far back from the gate entrance, luckily, and after 2 turns I would be completely out of sight from the gate. I waited for my boyfriend, and when he came out I told him everything that happened. I was shaking and crying, and he ended up driving us back to my place. We exited from the main gate that was on the other side of the base. It was a longer drive home, but meant that we wouldn't run the risk of the guy possibly waiting on a side road for me to drive back out of the base. When I took him back that night, the guard had obviously done a shift change, but my boyfriend knew the one working and asked if she'd heard anything about a guy following someone. She was very excited to tell us that the dude in the blue van had been arrested by the military police. As it turned out, the dude tried to tell the guard I was his daughter and that I was just being difficult, and could he please let me go through to get me. The guard played it cool and pretended to be understanding, but said he needed to do a sweep of the car and they would have to have someone escort him to find me since he didn't have military ID nor visitor pass. The guy tried to say no, but the guard insisted. The guy tried to lead foot it through the military gate anyway. Clearly not a good idea to try and force your way onto a military installation. He didn't even make it a quarter of a mile before the military police had him pull over and cuffed him, and they found a gun in his center console. I don't know what that guy would have done to me had he caught up with me, assaulted, or anything worse. I no longer live in that city, and I'm no longer dating that boyfriend. I have new license plates on my car, and I live in a new state. And I have no idea what eventually happened to Mr. Astro. I'm pretty sure he did some jail time considering he tried to gun it through the base with a firearm in the console, but I have no idea how much time and have no desire to try and find out what happened to him. So yeah, Mr. Astro, let's never meet again. I was about 6 to 7 years old. I didn't have any friends when I was that age, because of how messed up my family was, and having ADHD and really messed up teeth. They're fine now after braces and a palate extender, but there was this older girl named Angela next door. She was about 14, and I didn't know any better, and when she asked to hang out all the time, I did. One day she invited me to play or something or whatever, and she brought me into her parents' room. Her dad was an army ranger, but there was a disgusting amount of weapons in that room. She picked up a shotgun and joked about ending me and other people. Me, being 6 or 7, just laughed it off, thinking it was cool. She then loaded the gun in front of me and showed me how it worked, pointed at my face and told me to crawl around the house for hours. I crawled around and cried, and she would put the thing in my mouth and my face and would spook me with many other weapons and dry fire them at me. She then told me at one point to get undressed, and I told her I would do it in the bathroom because I was uncomfortable doing it in front of others. So I crawled into the bathroom, slammed the door and locked it, jumped out the window, and was about a story and a half up. I landed on my face and chipped my tooth. I got away and kept this secret for about 2 weeks from my mum. I didn't know any better. When I finally told her she lost it, she called the cops and they went over to her parents and questioned her and her parents. Her reasoning is that I shot her with a Nerf gun one time, so it was payback. I didn't see her for years later until I found out she was admitted to a mental hospital by her parents. I don't know how that day could have gone, but I'm glad I'm still around. About 30 years ago, I used to work for a pizzeria in the small town in which I live. It's the kind of place where you know pretty much everyone who you bump into on your route, who you're delivering to. Anyway, we were understaffed that day. I was also answering the phones while I was waiting for my replacement, as technically I was the delivery driver. This wasn't an uncommon thing I had to do, as we were always incredibly understaffed. It was an independent, low-budget pizzeria, and the guy was stingy as hell when it came to working. I get this call, and it's an old lady. We hadn't heard from her in absolutely ages, I'd say at least a year. But she sometimes ordered pizzas, Hawaiian. So we get the order. However, there's something weird about this phone call. She doesn't say hello or anything like she usually would. When the phone answers, she's just saying she'd like a Hawaiian pizza, and then hangs up the phone. She didn't even say where to. Again, small town. I guess she either assumed we knew who she was and where she lived. Well, I think that's the only reason, really. In any case, we know who she is. She's on our system. We double check, make the pizza, and about 20 minutes later, when my replacement arrives, I can finally start making my way. This old lady lived a bit out in the sticks. It's a small town, so the sticks aren't exactly far, and after 10 minutes do I reach a little rural cottage, out in the middle of basically nowhere. All the lights were off when I first approached the house, which gave me a very weird vibe and made me feel quite unsettled. I grabbed my flashlight and peeked out and flashed it towards the door, seeing if there was a paper note or anything saying she'd be right back, but there was no such thing. I hesitantly stepped out, grabbed the pizza from the back seat, and started making my way towards the door. I knocked a few times on the door and waited, tapping my feet, expecting her to answer the door any moment now, keeping in mind her age and the fact she might be delayed. I remember it was cold, as I was standing out there, the only warmth coming from the pizza on top of my hands. I waited for about 2 to 3 minutes, growing ever more bored. That's when I decided to knock again. I knocked firmly and said, "Hello, it's the pizza." I waited 2 more minutes. I was starting to get annoyed. So I started looking around the house to see if perhaps she hadn't heard me or was in another room. I looked with my flashlight just to double check. This was starting to get weird. Just at the point where I thought perhaps I should go back, did it strike me that I should go round the house and check the garden or something. Perhaps in some bizarre turn of events, she walked outside and got locked out. There wasn't a gate or anything, so, being sort of hesitant still, I opted to walk around and just double check. For her safety too. I reached the back of her house and she's got these big glass windows that are basically the size of a door that look out into her garden. Just as I turn on my flashlight to look inside, do I see a sight I'll never forget. The woman is lying on the floor. I panic. I freak out. I grab my phone and start dialing, trying to get in contact with my manager. Only then does it hit me that if something's happened to her, I really should be calling the authorities. so quickly hang up and dial an ambulance. From there, it was a whole thing with EMTs and the police, and to cut a long story short, it turned out she'd been dead a while, at least a few days by their reckoning. It was very cold in the house, and winter, so at least her body hadn't entered a big state of decay. But the real question on my mind was, how could a dead body order a pizza? There was no one in the house, the police confirmed it, and I was physically there when they went in and broke the door down. It was a very uncomfortable situation. Obviously the pizza went cold, and me and the police and the EMTs ended up eating it. But even so, it's one of these things in life that I really can't explain. We didn't record our calls, but I remember receiving it, writing down the order, and the whole process like it was just yesterday. And it really gets me thinking, does anyone have an explanation for how this came to be? Maybe she just wanted one last pizza before she crossed over. Guess I'll never know. In basic training, there is a mock deployment for the Air Force called Beast Week. Basic is in Texas, and it's hot as hell. During this Beast Week, we go through basic deployment stuff and live, kind of like we're deployed. So we have, I think, 10 very large tents in a circle with a bunker in the middle surrounded by mostly desert. Every night there's 2 people on shift doing security for every tent. So as we're sitting there in the boring ass dark, looking at stars and talking about nonsense, we hear a very faint "help." But this wasn't a normal cry for help. This was the creepiest cry for help you've ever heard. So me and my other entry controller buddy are freaking out, and we look at each other, and I tell him to wait here and I'll check to see if the other ECs have heard anything. The 2 left of us said that they did hear something. One of them kind of recognized it as help, and the one further down on the left thought it sounded like an animal noise. I went to every tent that night and asked them to do a head count. We're all accounted for, and one of the other ECs was freaked out enough that they decided, you know what, let's tell Central Quarters. 20 minutes later, I'm getting my ass handed to me because I didn't report it immediately. I did, however, try to explain that we thought it was an animal because it was not a normal sounding help, and that everyone had heard it was freaked out. It freaked me out pretty well, not sure what it could have been.